Seconds and 1 frame. I'll have you know, it has always been a dream of mine to review a movie, and as a doctor in Insect Flight Biomechanics, what better one to choose than to fact-check B-movie on our Day of the Lord April Fool's Day. Unfortunately, a short runtime in meme form means a very long runtime in explainer form because there is just a lot wrong with this movie. So buckle up, baby, because we're in for a ride. After enjoying my totally accurate title sequence, let's enjoy the B-movie title sequence. Now, at first, I thought this would be unrealistic given that a bee might not be able to fly this high and a man can't stand on the moon. But I think we understand that this is quite possibly a movie set. And bees also actually can fly at high altitudes. There were some experiments done on honeybees by Berkeley researchers where they altered the air pressure and density conditions, and they actually showed that they were able to fly in conditions that matched those of over 9,000 meters at altitude, which is actually higher than Mount Everest. Meanwhile, the Himalayan honeybee Apis laboriosa actively nests at heights of over 4,000 meters. We also know that bees can also reach high altitudes relative to the ground when flying, although there generally isn't the need to do so because flowers are usually quite close to the ground. However, drones, the male bees, will routinely reach heights of up to 30 meters in the air when they are searching for a queen to mate with. And the bee here is Barry Benson, after all, our male protagonist, who I hear is looking for his human queen. So I'm gonna let this one slide for now. Especially as when the bee bothers the DreamWorks human and he falls down, the sound of the fall actually informs us of how high up the moon is. Now, this poor man definitely is sustaining a very serious injury or two from his fall, which lasts exactly 880 milliseconds, and using a free fall calculator, I could find out that this scene actually takes place less than 4 meters in the air, which is a height perfectly achievable for bees. However, you might have noticed that the man screams "ouch" before hitting the moon, indicating that he was likely stung by the bee. At the end of the scene, the bee lands and it is revealed that it is Barry. Now, Barry is a male bee, and male bees can't sting. The bee's stinger is a modified ovipositor, which is anatomy that only the female bee has in order to lay eggs. Ovi, egg, positor, to place or position. It places the eggs. So this means that male bees are stingless and harmless. Secondly, the human epidermis is thick enough that the barbed sting of a honeybee will get stuck inside and is ripped out of their body, which is where the whole "honeybees die when they sting" mantra comes from. However, when Barry lands on the moon, we see that he seems to still have his stinger and is completely unbothered by this, even though less than 2 minutes later in the movie, we learn that he does know this fact through his conversation with his friend Adam.
Hey, did you hear about Frankie?
Yeah.
You going to his funeral?
No, I'm not going to his funeral. Everybody knows you sting someone, you die. You don't waste it on a squirrel.
But anyway, we are getting ahead of ourselves here. The other thing that actually troubles me even more is the fact that Barry, an insect, a hexapod, appears to only have 4 legs, a supernumerary stinger and missing legs, starting out on the wrong foot. And thirdly, the scale difference going on here is obviously inaccurate, but at this point I have to give in to allowing some sort of artistic licensing. So anyway, we are 15 seconds into the movie, and there are already 4 ways this movie is wrong. But anyway, let's keep going, because now it is the official start to the movie. According to all known laws of aviation, there is no way that a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground, but the bee, of course, flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is impossible. I may have spent my entire PhD hearing this, and in summary, it's obviously not true. We have lift and drag equations for flight, which are applied to aeroplanes, but when we apply them to bees, well, yeah, the math doesn't work out. And this is because, shockingly, the plane equations operate under 2 key assumptions that the bees do not meet. First of all, lift and drag equations that are generally being referenced in these circumstances assume that the flying object is flying under a turbulent regime. This is determined by the Reynolds number, which is a very niche engineering term, but essentially measures the ratio of inertial to viscous forces. Very low Reynolds numbers, think under 100, are dominated by very laminar flow. But at higher Reynolds numbers, think low to several thousand and above, the flow tends to be turbulent. Most birds, aeroplanes, they all fly under turbulent flow, and those lift and drag equations that people reference to apply to airplane flight assume that the Reynolds number is high, so they work. Bees, however, are so small that the air around them is relatively much more viscous, and therefore the way the air behaves around them is substantially different. The second key assumption is that aeroplanes don't flap their wings, but honeybees do. And this also affects the way that we would express and apply these equations. And also in the context of a different airflow regime, the aerodynamic phenomena that are at play when a bee flies is extremely different to that of a plane. So yes, we do actually in fact understand the physics of how bees fly, and I am very tempted to make a video about this because it is technically my area of expertise. But for today, suffice to say, a bee and a jumbo jet are very different. I will give them something though. Bees definitely do not care what humans think is impossible. That would be an incredible waste of brain ganglion space. And also, this human who wrote this also did not care what was impossible for bees. Anyway, 37 seconds into the movie, 6 mistakes, probably a record. Let's go on. The movie then continues. We get a little slice of Barry's life. We see his clothes and his shoes, and we see that the shoes are presented in groups of 6, which feels like a nice touch. Until we remember that Barry, and every single other bee in this movie, only has 4 legs, of which only 2 wear shoes. So I'm going to call inconsistency there. Next up, he douses himself in honey. Bees use honey for nutrition and sugar, but they don't roll around in it like pigs in mud, and they definitely don't use it to groom themselves nor to mouthwash. Nor do bees really sweat, although as we have learnt on this channel, bumblebees do squirt. Next, Barry calls Adam using his antennae.
Oh, hang on a second. Hello?
Barry?
Now, a recent study from a year ago that does show that in the dark, honeybees do use their antennae to pick up on the vibrations and movements to garner the directions of waggle dances, but they are obviously not used telepathically. And again, male bees do not have singers. Next up, we meet Barry's family. Somehow, he has a mum who does not seem to be the queen, and she mentions his dad, whom we then go on to meet. Now, in beehives, there are generally no dads. Drones, which are the male bees, mate with queens during a nuptial flight. The process typically lasts less than 5 seconds, and the drones generally pass away afterwards. They don't gather nectar or pollen, and they certainly don't live in the hive. They definitely don't help build a hive, and if they somehow end up in the hive, they are going to get kicked out. The other mistake comes down to a bee's family structure. Bees are haplodiploid, and what does this mean? Well, in the specific case of honeybees, female bees develop from fertilized eggs, and they are diploid. That means that they have 2 sets of genetic material, one from the queen, one from the drone, just like us. Meanwhile, the male bees are haploid. They only have 1 set of genetic material, and they are born from the queen's unfertilized eggs. So that means they don't have a dad. So who is he? In fact, every single time a male bee appears in this movie, which is shockingly often, the entire sex balance of this movie is off. It is wrong. So I'm just going to get started now. Wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex.
Distinguished bees.
You should not be here. You should not be here. Wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex. Wrong sex again. All of the wrong sex. Wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex. Oh my God. You know what I'm going to say? Wrong sex, 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 wrong sex. His parents also reference watching him graduate from row 118,000.
Wave to us. We'll be in row 118,000.
Bye.
I don't know how many bees sit per row, but even with a minimum of 9 bees per row, that would imply the hive has over 1 million bees in attendance of the graduation, which implies they are all from the same family. And whilst theoretically a queen bee could lay that many eggs, hives typically have 20 to 80,000 bees at any one time, so there wouldn't even be enough bees in the hive to reach row 118,000 in single file. So once again, the numbers just don't add up. Also, we keep seeing Barry and other bees driving cars that they don't need, especially when they immediately go on to prove that they don't need them.
Bees as a species haven't had 1 day off in 27 million years. Whew.
Also, the figure 27 million years ago keeps being bandied around.
We've been living the bee way a long time. 27 million years.
It's strong and it's pulling me like a 27 million year old instinct.
And it's worth saying that honeybees actually evolved well over 27 million years ago. And even if we're just talking about behaviors where they don't sleep or rest and they only work, that's also not true. Honeybees do rest and sleep and spend periods of time where they aren't doing anything.
We know that you as a bee have worked your whole life to get to the point where you can work for your whole life.
And also, the larvae don't work either. They are some of the most well-kept of all the bees. After Adam then mentions interest in one of the female worker bees,
That girl was hot.
She's my cousin.
She is?
Yes, we're all cousins.
Barry points out that they're cousins. And who knows, maybe they are due to the interesting family history they apparently have going on, but if this were following traditional hive ancestry, it would actually be even worse. They would be siblings. There are also many scenes where we observe the three-dimensionality of bees being challenged, and in the vast majority of them, I do regret to inform that the bee would be an unlikely survivor. But as someone who does actually like bees, I am glad they survive, even if it's unrealistic. Then we meet the pollen jocks. Of course, the sex is wrong, but they are onto something here. The bees that do go out to forage are often a little bit larger in size, but nowhere near the size difference that is hinted at here.
You can't just decide one day to be a pollen jock. You have to be bred for that.
Technically speaking, only the queens are bred, in that the larvae are given royal jelly, which enables them to develop into becoming a reproductive queen. Also, this is not where pollen is stored. I do conveniently have a video on this channel called Why Are Bees So Fuzzy, which does answer the question, so I will not repeat myself. Also, no stingers. This is not how bees fly.
You all know bees cannot fly in rain.
Next up, can bees fly in the rain? Look, it isn't ideal for them to fly under rainy conditions, as raindrops are large and they can affect their flight performance, but honeybees can and do fly in light rain conditions, and they will generally attempt to reach shelter at the hive if possible, and they will forage in the rain if they absolutely need to. So this is not entirely true either, but that being said, we do later see Barry flying through the rain, so I guess the movie changed his mind. They also talk about pollen being a status symbol and making them attractive.
That's more pollen than you and I will ever see in a lifetime.
It's just a status symbol. I think bees make too big a deal out of it.
Perhaps, unless you're wearing it and the ladies see you wearing it.
However, it is actually the drones who seek out the queens, and they're able to trace chemical signals that she releases from her mandibular glands, and they mate in flight very, very quickly. The queen will often, but not always, actually mate with several drones and collect the semen from all of them, retaining around 100 million spermatozoa to then fertilize eggs far into the future. But as we specified before, males don't gather nectar, they don't pollinate or do anything of the sort, so this is also wrong. Also, Barry is very obsessed with the outside.
Where are you?
I'm going out.
Out? Out where?
Out there.
Oh no!
I have to.
Which is interesting because, as I have been saying repeatedly, the drones are kicked out and only get to live outside where they will hopefully meet a mate. So in some ways, Barry was actually performing the correct natural behavior expected from a male bee. Until the point in which instead of a queen bee, he pursued a human.
He's been talking to humans.
What?
Talking to humans?
He has a human girlfriend.
Oh, Barry.
And they make out!
Make out? Barry?
But I am going to entirely skip the bees talking and bestiality human bee romance part of the movie because we don't need a doctor in entomology to spell that out for you, as obviously unrealistic. We also see him outside catching up with some cyclists. As an insect flight biomechanicist, I did look up the maximum speed that bees can fly at and compared it to the leisurely rates of cyclists. And, fully fueled and with no pollen, it would be entirely possible for bees to overtake cyclists at their maximum flight speed, especially if cyclists are going at a slower speed through the park. However, the manner in which he was able to keep up with traffic later in the show is slightly less believable. We do see the pollen jocks look at the world through special visors, and admittedly, bees are able to see UV light, which allows them to see markings on flowers to know where to land and where to pollinate and where to gather nectar. It definitely isn't quite the way the movie is illustrating here, but I will say they tried, and I will grant success. Anyway, on Barry's first proper outdoor adventure, instead of flying high to find his queen, he ends up glued to a tennis ball. And I don't know if it's just the tennis player's technique is just terrible, but tennis balls generally have topspin, which means Barry would be spinning around a very different axis, and the topspin is up to 40 to 50 revolutions per second, which would be fast enough to separate him from the ball. Some topspin is finally instated just to make the moment tense. He then engages on a very tumultuous journey through cars in which he most definitely would have perished on multiple occasions, and then coincidentally reaches the tennis player's home at the same time as them. Given he practically hitched a car ride the whole way there and they hadn't even left the park yet, I'm not sure how they beat him to it, But as established, timeline and plot consistency aren't things that matter to B-movie, because doing impossible things is precisely what this script is based upon. And after inexplicably talking to a human who saves him,
Hi.
she offers him cake, and he turns it down because he needs to lose.
Couple micrograms here.
Where?
Now, honeybees weigh around 100 milligrams, which is 100,000 micrograms. Bees lose weight just by existing. He probably dropped that weight in that sentence, just so you know. He is also offered coffee, which I'm pretty certain a bee of his size would be unable to generate the suction required to sip from that straw. But anyway, the plotline progresses with lots of talking and elements that we have already covered, until Barry joins a traffic chase and he catapults himself from a backpack onto a bus. However, this catapult action would not be possible from neither his own strength capabilities nor from a physics standpoint. There, he will meet another male insect who is, of course, the wrong sex.
I'm going to Alaska. Moose blood.
Male mosquitoes don't drink blood, only the females do, in order to be able to have sufficient nutrients to lay eggs. Females run the insect world, and this movie is in denial about it. Wrong sex, wrong sex, wrong sex. Anyway, after living as the wrong sex in the hive and falling in love with a human, he then decides to sue humans for exploiting bees and stealing their honey. I'm not certain how easily an animal can go to court in modern times, but allegedly there are records held against animals from the 13th to the 18th century, such as this for the pig and her piglets who were being trialed for the death of a child, with the mother found guilty and the piglets acquitted. But I can say it would be illegal to bring in a grizzly bear as he did to make a pointless point in court. There are also many occasions where the bees are displayed as being far stronger and far more resistant to death than they actually would be in real life, even if they are strong and hardy for their size. Also, this scene would have absolutely started a house fire, where they would probably also not survive. This was neat, but it's also not how physics works. I'm also surprised he didn't go down the bog, given his penchant to survive and wind up exactly where he needs to be anyway. Now, in the actual lawsuit, the evil side does actually make a good point that I made earlier.
Doesn't your queen give birth to all the bee children in the hives?
Yeah, but...
So those aren't even your real parents!
Oh, Barry. Yes, they are.
Personally, I was hoping to actually find out the family structure. Are they adopted? Are they all actually siblings? But no, we actually never get to find that out. Also, as the movie progresses, Barry also criticizes the human uses of honey, such as it being employed in hygiene products, which he also uses. Following the success of the lawsuit, in which they literally receive a settlement of liquid gold, the bees recoup all of their honey and realize that they don't need to work anymore, so they decide to revel in their free time. Aside from boredom, it also leads to all the flowers going unpollinated, such that they immediately turn grey and die. And don't get me wrong, bees are essential to the life cycle of many flowers and they aid in their pollination, but many plants are pollinated by multiple insect species, other animals altogether, some are wind pollinated, and so on and so forth. So the bee dependence isn't as exaggerated as we see it displayed. Not to mention the fact that not pollinating flowers doesn't make the flowers wilt any faster than they would otherwise. It just means that they wouldn't be fertilizing any seeds for the next generation. He is also introduced to this disaster by his human love interest, even though he technically would have witnessed this on the flight over to her. Shockingly, the solution to this flower death is for his human love interest to travel to Pasadena for one of the very rare, accurate portions of this movie. Pasadena does in fact have a rose parade, and I know this because I live in Pasadena. I'm also not sure how specifically roses alone are supposed to save all of the species that are dying, but again, that goes unexplained in the movie. Unfortunately, on the flight back from Pasadena, the pilot and the co-pilot face some serious issues upon encountering Barry and are now unconscious whilst piloting the plane, meaning that Vanessa and him are now in charge of flying the plane. And then I heard this.
Vanessa, this is nothing more than a big metal bee. It's got giant wings, huge engines.
Which takes me back to the beginning, where I state that airplane flight and insect flight are extremely different, and I am not going to repeat myself, but it is not the same. He needs to be grounded for that. Unfortunately, that's exactly what's about to happen. Because his hive flies out to help guide the plane to land, some bees are on the ground signaling and others are carrying the plane. Now, even if we hugely overestimated the strength and number of bees in this hive, let's say they did have 1 million bees, and let's say that each bee can carry twice of its body weight. So even though in reality bees carry 50 to 80% of their body weight, let's say we have 1 million bees, each one can carry 200 milligrams. That would still only yield the ability to carry around 200 kilograms. the weight of an unloaded A340 is 177 tons, and these bees would not even be able to budge a sixth of the weight of an unloaded Cessna 172. Also remember how at the start I talked about how high bees could fly? Commercial jetliners fly at a cruising altitude of nearly 11 kilometers in the air. So theoretically, they may be able to fly on the verge of those conditions, but they certainly can't fly beyond 30 to 50 meters from the ground. So there's no way they would be able to hone in on the plane and help it land from so high up. And the point at which the plane would realistically be in reach to be able to be reached by the bees and be able to land, it would be so out of control that even multiple swarms of bees would not be able to stop the disaster in any conceivable way. It also doesn't address the fact as to how the bees were able to just cross the continent at a moment's notice without a plane in the first place. But we have learned that in this movie, bees are very good at teleporting, so...
Listen, everyone. This runway is covered with the last pollen from the last flowers available anywhere on Earth.
Also, this is actually quite cute, but, you know, okay, he can't talk, and even if he could, his voice wouldn't travel this well, although I guess this entire hive did travel across the continent. Also, following the immediate retrieval of the roses, we see immediately how their pollen proceeds to immediately revive every single species of flower in sight. Again, not how a season pollination would work, nor how it would resume. Also, at best, if this worked, they would all now have a much smaller and depleted gene pool from the DNA from that single Pasadena Rose Parade float. And at worst, this is a sterile mess, which won't be much better because we don't know if they can actually reproduce with roses. Finally, we did pick holes at other animals, whether they could be involved in law, and the answer is no. But anyway, Barry can still now do law even without passing the bar with a mosquito. And with that, it goes out to the closing scene with a very long line of credits with very few, if any, women in the directors and producers, on which I will not provide further comment as to whether that influenced the sex balance and accuracy of the movie. But what I will say is that I didn't see any entomologists in the credits. So anyway, following an emotional, legal, and biological rollercoaster through the trials and tribulations of being a bee in capitalist society with more plot holes than a Swiss cheese, we finally make it to the end of Bee Movie with everything ending just as right and as wrong as it needed to be. Now, before I go, please stay with me. Today's video is not sponsored, but I do want to tell you a little bit more about my stuff. I know that each time I post, I get a lot of very sweet comments from everyone saying, oh my god, Draw Curiosity's back, I miss this channel. And I'm always delighted to be back here. I wanted to say, if you are in want of extra Inés content, I actually do stream 3 times a week over on Twitch. That's about 60 hours of Inés a month. It's grown a lot since I soft launched it last year, so if you like live interactions...
Very more cheered X2 spicy noodle time.
Insects, puns... Gotta toot my own crumpet.
That was the most upsetting thing you've ever said.
Lego, retro games, getting... Oh my god! Pokemon, and all the added chaos that Twitch has, I think you might enjoy it over there. I generally stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday, midday to 6 p.m. Los Angeles Pacific time. Sometimes there's some cosplay at the weekends. One of my ultimate goals is to be able to hire an editor, and the main reason that I'm so slow at getting videos out on YouTube is I just don't have the human hours to edit in a timely fashion, and I also don't have the extra income to be able to hire an editor. So the goal is to eventually get there where I can sustain myself from my science communication work, and I can also bring people onto a team. So if you do enjoy my stuff, and if you've made it this far into the video and you like the things that I make, consider supporting me maybe on Patreon. I tried rebooting it this year, and there's a lot more content than there ever was. Every time I've released a video, I've put up a behind the scenes and bloopers video, which has amounted to hours of extra content. I've been making 360 videos as well, where I take you places, and there's like a whole hour and a half extra of content a month. And of course, there's also access to all of the old Twitch bots. So if this interests you, feel free to check it out. There is no obligation. Other things you can check out as well. I moved completely over to Blue Sky from Twitter, so I now have a Blue Sky account. My Instagram is still running. I was recently on Lateral podcast, and I was also on the Formicry. So there's other Inés content on the internet as well, and I'm doing my best to return as much and as frequently as possible. And, you know, I started out on YouTube, so I do want to come back here. Anyway, if you've made it this far, I have a code, which is MANTIS. If you use the code MANTIS to sign up to my Patreon over the next week, you will get 25% off as my special thank you for signing up to my Patreon and supporting my content and hopping on at a moment's notice. And it's also totally fine if that's not for you. All support and just watching the videos and sharing it and commenting on it and enjoying them as they are is fine as well. But if you are someone who likes to support content creators and you want to know if it's going to make a difference or not, right now, every little bit makes a difference. With all that being said, I wanted to say thank you so much to all of my wonderful patrons and Twitch subscribers for supporting the work I do and for believing in the work I do. And as always, thank you so much for watching me. I'll see you in the next one.